The room was buzzing with excitement, chatter, and the occasional laugh. People filled the small talent hall, a mixture of families, teenagers, and older couples. Some were here because they loved music, while others had come for a casual afternoon of entertainment. The chairs were arranged in rows, and a small stage at the front held a single piano. It looked polished and ready, gleaming under the overhead lights. The audience's attention shifted to the stage as a young woman entered quietly, her movements tentative. She carried herself with a kind of nervous caution, her eyes flicking to the audience before focusing on the piano from the very first step. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Do you think she will actually play?" someone asked, their voice laced with amusement. "She looks so unsure," another said, stifling a laugh. It was clear that many in the audience expected something comical or awkward. Perhaps a performance that would make them chuckle at the effort rather than admire the skill. Her appearance and demeanor didn't match the usual confident performers who strode onto the stage with boldness and flair. Instead, she seemed delicate and fragile, as if any sudden movement might shatter the quiet atmosphere she carried with her. She paused at the piano. Taking a deep breath, her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. The murmurs of doubt grew, not out of malice, but curiosity and the natural tendency to judge someone based on first impressions. People expected a mistake, a pause, or perhaps even a failed attempt at melody. Children in the audience giggled softly, sensing the tension, while older viewers exchanged knowing glances, some shaking their heads as if to say, "Here comes another disaster." Despite the judgment and whispers, she remained focused. Her eyes traced the keys, her fingers trembling, but her posture held a quiet determination. It was as if she carried a secret in her mind, something the audience could not yet see. She bent slightly, letting her hands rest on the piano keys, with a gentle touch. The hall grew quieter as people leaned forward, sensing the beginning of a performance. Still, the atmosphere was thick with doubt, the kind that makes you question if the next few minutes will be worth watching. The first sound she produced was soft, a single note that lingered in the air. It wasn't loud or attention-grabbing, but it held a certain precision that made people pause. Heads turned, some in curiosity, others still skeptical. The note was delicate, yet confident in its presence. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The young woman let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, as if listening to the silence between the sounds. The audience began to notice something unusual. The performance was not clumsy. It was intentional. Each movement, each placement of her fingers, was thoughtful, precise, and careful. She continued, adding another note, then a soft chord. The melody was simple, almost like a whisper, yet it carried a strange beauty that began to pull the audience in. People who had come expecting laughter or awkwardness found themselves leaning forward, their attention captured by the unexpected skill before them. Some whispered to their neighbors, "She can actually play," while others simply sat silently, unsure of how to react to something that defied their expectations. Her face remained calm, but her eyes told a different story. There was a mix of concentration, nervousness, and a quiet confidence that grew with each note. She had prepared for this moment, and now that she was on stage, all the preparation seemed to pour through her fingers into the piano. The music was soft at first, almost tentative, but it carried emotion that resonated with those listening. It wasn't flashy or loud, but it had depth, a story hidden in the simplicity of her touch. A few minutes passed, and the audience began to adjust their perception. The initial laughter and smirks disappeared, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Every time her fingers moved across the keys, a new layer of melody emerged, more complex and beautiful than the last. People started to notice the control she had over the instrument, the way each note followed naturally from the one before. It was clear she was not here for amusement. She was here to convey something meaningful. Some in the audience felt a sudden connection to the music, a memory or an emotion stirred by the soft chords. An older man leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. A young woman clutched her purse, feeling a wave of calm she hadn't expected. Even the children quieted down, sensing that this performance was different from the noisy, playful music they were used to hearing. The atmosphere shifted from doubt to respect, a transformation so subtle that many in the room barely noticed it. Happening, the young woman's hands moved with growing confidence. The slight tremble that had marked her first notes was gone, replaced by fluidity and precision. She began to experiment with small variations in tempo, her fingers dancing lightly over the keys, yet every sound remained deliberate. The melody evolved naturally, as if it had a life of its own, guiding her hands across the piano. The audience could feel the care and thought behind each note, the result of hours, days, and perhaps years of practice, hidden beneath the calm exterior of a seemingly timid performer. As the piece continued, a few audience members exchanged glances, their previous assumptions melting away. They had expected laughter or awkwardness, but instead, they found themselves captivated. Some felt embarrassed for their initial judgments, a quiet realization that they had underestimated someone based solely on appearance and demeanor. The young woman's music was doing more than entertaining. It was challenging their expectations and reshaping their understanding of talent. Time seemed to slow as she played. The soft lights reflected off the piano, highlighting the delicate movements of her fingers. Each chord, each note was deliberate yet effortless, creating a rhythm that was both soothing and compelling. The audience's focus intensified, their attention fixed on the unfolding performance. The room was no longer filled with chatter or laughter. It had transformed into a space of quiet admiration. The young woman, once the object of casual amusement, was now the center of something extraordinary. She paused briefly, letting a few notes linger in the air, creating a moment of suspense. The silence was thick, almost tangible, as the audience held their breath, waiting for what would come next. It was in this pause that the power of her performance became clear. She was not just playing music. She was telling a story, communicating emotions without words. The young woman's presence, her focus, and her skill combined to create an atmosphere that demanded respect. When she resumed, the melody deepened, revealing layers of complexity that many had not anticipated. The audience could sense her growth with each measure, a quiet transformation that mirrored the journey of the music itself. What began as a soft tentative performance had blossomed into something captivating, a blend of skill, emotion, and presence that defied expectations. The initial laughter that had seemed likely now felt inappropriate, replaced by awe and genuine appreciation by the end of her first piece. The room was silent, caught in the spell of the performance. The young woman took a deep breath, her fingers resting gently on the keys. She had proven, without words or dramatic gestures, that she was a musician of talent and heart. The audience, once ready to mock or dismiss her, now sat in quiet reflection. Processing the unexpected brilliance they had just witnessed, the stage, the piano, and the young woman herself had become more than a performance. They had become a moment of connection, a shared experience that would linger in the minds of those present long after the music faded. As she stepped back, her eyes met those of a few audience members who nodded subtly, a gesture of silent respect. The young woman's journey on stage had only just begun, but she had already shattered the assumptions of everyone in the room. The whispers of doubt had been replaced by an unspoken acknowledgement. She was someone to be listened to, someone whose music spoke louder than appearances or expectations. In that quiet hall, she had claimed her space, not with words or showmanship, but with the undeniable power of her piano and the truth of her talent. After the initial piece, the audience sat quietly, still absorbing what they had witnessed. The young woman remained seated at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her eyes closed for a brief moment. It was a pause that held weight, almost as if she was gathering energy for what was to come next. The silence in the room was profound, but it was no longer filled with doubt or expectation of failure. Instead, it was a space filled with curiosity and anticipation. The audience had seen a glimpse of something remarkable, and now they were ready to see more. The murmurs that had followed her first piece were replaced by quiet whispers of admiration. People exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise and respect. Some nodded slightly to themselves, acknowledging the skill that had just been displayed. Even those who had initially doubted her were no longer smirking or whispering jokes. The energy in the room had shifted slowly but unmistakably, from light-hearted skepticism to attentive appreciation. She began to play again, this time more confidently. Her fingers moved over the keys with precision, yet each note carried a softness, a subtle tenderness that made the music feel alive. The melody was more intricate now, layered with harmonies that intertwined delicately, creating an atmosphere that was both captivating and calming. It was music that seemed to tell a story without words, a language of emotion that resonated with the audience on a personal level. As the music flowed, she added slight variations in rhythm, small improvisations that demonstrated not only technical skill, but also a deep understanding of the piano. Each note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The audience began to lean forward in their seats, drawn in by the growing complexity and beauty of the performance. The initial doubts, the expectation of laughter, had vanished entirely. What remained was genuine attention and curiosity, a desire to understand the story the young woman was sharing through her music. A young boy in the front row watched her intently, eyes wide with fascination. He had been fidgeting and whispering to his mother during the earlier performance, but now he sat completely still, captivated by the music. Beside him, an elderly woman held her hands together, her eyes moist with emotion. She had lived a long life filled with challenges and joys, and the music seemed to speak to experiences she had carried silently for years. The young woman at the piano, unaware of the impact she was having, continued to play, letting the melody guide her hands and her heart. The music began to swell, growing richer and more expressive. She incorporated subtle shifts in dynamics, softening certain passages and emphasizing others, creating a sense of movement and depth. It was a performance that required careful listening, yet it felt effortless, natural, and deeply personal. Every person in the audience could feel the story she was telling, whether they understood it consciously or simply felt it in their hearts. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the piano, and for a moment, it was as if the outside world had disappeared entirely. A few of the audience members exchanged quiet words, acknowledging the unexpected brilliance of the performance. "She's amazing," one whispered. "I didn't expect this at all," said another. The young woman's ability to transform skepticism into admiration was unfolding before their eyes. The initial laughter that some had anticipated was replaced by silence filled with awe and respect. It was clear that she was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing to share a piece of herself, to communicate through music in a way that transcended words. The complexity of the second piece increased gradually. She introduced variations that challenged the listener to pay attention, yet these changes never felt overwhelming. Instead, they drew the audience deeper into the music, creating a sense of intimacy and connection. The young woman's confidence grew visibly with each passing moment. Her body relaxed, her shoulders dropped, and the nervous tension that had marked her first entrance seemed to melt away. She was no longer a tentative performer. She was a storyteller, a musician fully immersed in the language of her instrument. A subtle rhythm emerged in the melody, gently carrying the audience along. The music was like a river, flowing and winding through valleys of emotion, touching hearts with its quiet beauty. Those who had come expecting a joke or a shallow performance were now completely absorbed. Even the children, who often struggled to sit still during performances, remained captivated. Their eyes followed every movement of her fingers, their expressions reflecting wonder and curiosity. The audience was learning to listen differently, to engage not just with their ears but with their hearts. At certain moments, she allowed a note or chord to linger longer than expected, creating a pause that held powerful meaning. In these silent spaces between sounds, the audience felt the weight of the music, a presence that was both calming and profound. Some held their breath unconsciously, sensing the emotional depth being conveyed. The young woman's ability to control not only the notes, but the emotional resonance of her performance was becoming increasingly apparent. She had transformed a simple piano into a vessel of expression, capable of moving people in ways they had not anticipated. The audience's attention was unwavering. The initial assumptions of failure had been completely overturned. replaced by a growing appreciation for the artistry unfolding before them. People shifted in their seats, leaning closer to catch every nuance. Their eyes were fixed on the young woman, and yet it was clear that their focus was on the music itself, not the performer. She had become a conduit for something larger than herself, a bridge between the instrument and the emotions of those listening. The complexity of the piece continued to grow, introducing subtle changes in tempo and dynamics. She played with delicate touches, emphasizing certain notes while allowing others to fade softly, creating a layered texture that was both intricate and accessible. The audience felt the ebb and flow of the music, responding instinctively to its shifts and turns. The young woman's performance was no longer just a demonstration of skill. It was a conversation, a dialogue between her and the people who had once doubted her abilities. In one particularly moving passage, her hands moved rapidly across the keys, creating a cascade of notes that seemed to dance in the air. The audience was spellbound, watching the transformation from tentative beginnings to confident mastery. Some closed their eyes, letting the music envelop them completely, while others leaned forward, mesmerized by the precision and emotion of the performance. The young woman's expression remained serene, yet her eyes revealed the passion and focus that drove every movement of her fingers. The room was completely absorbed, a collective hush settling over the audience. Even the faintest sound, a soft sigh or the shifting of a chair, seemed amplified in the quiet space. The young woman's music had created an intimate connection, bridging the gap between performer and listener. Those who had come for light entertainment were now experiencing something deeper, a moment that transcended expectations and challenged their assumptions. The laughter they had anticipated had vanished entirely, replaced by a profound sense of engagement and respect. As the piece reached its conclusion, she allowed the final notes to linger in the air, soft and resonant. The silence that followed was filled with a mixture of admiration, surprise, and reflection. The audience remained still, absorbing the emotional impact of the performance. There were no whispers of doubt, no nervous giggles, only a shared recognition of the young woman's talent and the unexpected beauty she had brought into their lives. She took a deep breath, her hands resting gently on the keys. Her eyes met those of a few audience members, who nodded subtly, acknowledging the skill and emotion she had shared. The young woman had taken a space once filled with judgment and expectation and transformed it into a moment of connection and understanding. She had proven that talent cannot be measured by appearances alone, and that true artistry often arrives quietly without fanfare, yet leaves a lasting impression on all who witness it. As she prepared for the next piece, the audience's energy had shifted completely. The skepticism and doubt that had greeted her arrival were gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to see what would come next, fully engaged and ready to listen. The young woman, now fully immersed in her performance, seemed to draw strength from the attention and respect of those around her. The second part of her performance had not only showcased her skill, but had begun to reveal the depth of her artistry, promising even more to come as the music continued to unfold. The young woman's fingers rested lightly on the piano keys for a moment, her eyes scanning the room as if measuring the energy in the audience. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze, a connection she had already begun to form with those listening. The first two pieces had shifted the mood from doubt to admiration, and now she was ready to take the performance further. She drew in a deep breath and began to play, this time with a new sense of freedom and expression. The music started softly, almost like a whisper, but it quickly grew in complexity. Her hands moved gracefully across the keys, striking chords and melodies that intertwined seamlessly. Each note seemed to tell a story, conveying emotions that words could never capture. The audience, fully absorbed now, leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide and attentive. Every subtle movement of her fingers, every pause and accentuated note, held their attention completely. The young woman's body seemed to move in rhythm with the music. Her shoulders shifted gently, her head swaying slightly as she became more immersed in the performance. There was a sense of flow and naturalness in her movements that suggested she was not just playing notes but living within the music. The hall, once filled with whispers and expectation of failure, had become a space of focused silence, with everyone captivated by the unfolding artistry. She introduced a variation in the melody, a small improvisation that added depth and texture to the piece. The change was subtle, yet powerful, drawing the audience further into the story she was telling. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the emotions that each note carried. Others leaned closer to the stage, mesmerized by the precision and beauty of her performance. The young woman had transformed from a nervous performer into a confident storyteller. Using the piano as her voice, the dynamics of the piece shifted, rising and falling like waves. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving faster in certain passages, then slowing down to let each note resonate fully. The audience could feel the intensity and passion behind every sound. Some were visibly moved, their expressions softening as they connected with the music on a personal level. It was as if the young woman was speaking directly to each listener, conveying emotions that were universal yet deeply individual. A mother in the audience gently held her child's hand, whispering encouragement as the child watched in awe. A man in the back row had his eyes closed, a faint smile playing on his lips as memories and emotions stirred within him. The young woman, unaware of the personal impact she was having, continued to play with unwavering focus. Her music had become a bridge, connecting her to the audience in a way that transcended words and appearances. The melody took on a more dramatic tone, with bold chords interspersed between delicate, soft passages. She skillfully balanced intensity and subtlety, creating a sense of movement and anticipation. The audience was completely entranced, hanging on every note, feeling the story unfold before them. The young woman's ability to convey emotion through her performance was becoming increasingly evident. Her music was not just a display of technical skill. It was a deeply human expression that resonated with everyone present as the piece progressed. She introduced a series of intricate runs and arpeggios, showcasing both her technical ability and her creative expression. Each sequence flowed naturally into the next, building tension and then resolving it in a way that was satisfying and emotionally impactful. The audience's initial expectations of failure or laughter were long gone, replaced by a sense of awe and respect. They had witnessed the transformation of a quiet, tentative performer into a masterful musician commanding the room with her artistry. The young woman allowed herself a brief moment to pause, letting a single note linger in the air. The silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music itself. The audience held their breath, sensing the significance of the moment. It was a pause that spoke volumes, a quiet reminder that music was not only about sound, but about emotion, connection, and presence. The young woman's performance had reached a point where each silence was as meaningful as each note. Drawing the listeners deeper into the experience, she continued, weaving together themes from the earlier pieces with new, unexpected variations. The combination created a rich tapestry of sound, filled with emotion and storytelling. The audience was completely absorbed, unable to look away or think of anything else. The young woman's hands moved with a confidence that had not been present at the beginning of the performance. She was fully in control of the piano and fully in tune with the emotions she wanted to convey. A few audience members whispered to each other, expressing disbelief and admiration. "I didn't expect this at all," one said quietly. "She's incredible," replied another. The room was filled with a shared sense of wonder, a recognition of something special unfolding in front of them. The young woman had taken a space that had once been filled with doubt and transformed it into a place of beauty, emotion, and human connection. The complexity of the music increased further, with layered melodies and harmonies creating a sense of depth and movement. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, each note carefully considered and placed. The audience could feel the thought and emotion behind every sound. Some closed their eyes, imagining the story behind the music, while others simply sat in silent admiration, letting the performance envelop them completely. The young woman had created an experience that was both personal and universal, touching hearts without a single word spoken. As the piece approached its climax, the intensity of the music grew. She played with passion and determination, the notes building in volume and complexity. The audience was completely captivated, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes, all of them caught in the emotional wave of the performance. The young woman's presence on stage was commanding, yet humble, her focus entirely on the music and the connection it created. It was a powerful reminder that talent and dedication could overcome expectations and assumptions. The final moments of the piece were marked by a series of powerful chords, each one resonating through the hall. The audience held their breath, waiting for the last note to fade. When it finally did, there was a moment of profound silence, as if everyone was taking in the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The young woman sat quietly, her hands resting on the keys, a calm expression on her face. The room remained still, caught in the aftermath of the emotional journey she had guided them through, slowly. The audience began to clap, at first softly and then with growing enthusiasm. The applause was genuine and heartfelt, a reflection of the impact of her performance. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of awe and admiration. The young woman acknowledged the applause with a slight nod, her demeanor humble yet confident. She had proven that appearances could be deceiving, and that true talent often arrives quietly, without fanfare. But with undeniable impact, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as skepticism and doubt was now replaced by respect and appreciation. The young woman had not only performed with skill and emotion, but had also challenged the audience's perceptions and assumptions. She had shown that music, when played with sincerity and passion, could transcend expectations and touch hearts in profound ways. As she prepared for the next part of her performance, the audience's attention remained unwavering. The initial judgment and laughter that had greeted her arrival were long gone. Everyone in the room was ready to witness the continuation of a performance that had already become unforgettable. The young woman, fully immersed in her music, seemed to draw strength from the connection she had established. Part 3 of her performance had elevated the experience to a new level, leaving the audience eager for what would come next. And ensuring that the young woman's journey on the piano was far from over, the young woman took a moment to breathe before beginning the fourth piece, her fingers hovering lightly above the piano keys. The audience was completely silent, their eyes fixed on her as if afraid to blink and miss a single note. The room had transformed from one filled with doubt to a space brimming with anticipation and awe. People who had initially expected laughter or awkwardness now sat in rapt attention. Fully aware that they were about to witness something extraordinary, she started the piece with a soft, gentle chord that immediately set a calm and reflective mood. Her hands moved gracefully across the keys, creating a melody that was both soothing and deeply expressive. The audience leaned in closer, their focus sharpened as they followed every movement of her fingers. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of her wrist, the delicate touch of a single key felt significant and purposeful. The music was drawing them in, weaving an invisible connection between performer and listener. The young woman's expression was serene, yet her eyes betrayed a depth of emotion. She was fully immersed in the music, letting it flow through her naturally. Each note seemed to carry a part of her story, an unspoken truth that resonated with everyone in the room. The audience could sense her sincerity, and in turn, they responded with complete attention and quiet reverence. The energy in the hall was different now. It was no longer about expectation or judgment, but about shared experience and emotional connection. As the melody developed, she began to introduce subtle variations, small improvisations that added layers of complexity to the piece. Her hands moved with increasing confidence and fluidity, the notes flowing effortlessly yet purposefully. The audience was captivated, their earlier skepticism replaced by admiration and curiosity. Every person in the room seemed to feel the music personally, whether it reminded them of a memory, stirred an emotion, or simply offered a moment of beauty and calm. The young woman allowed the music to build gradually, creating tension and anticipation. She shifted between gentle, flowing passages and more dynamic, expressive moments, guiding the audience through an emotional journey. Each change in tempo or intensity was intentional, a carefully crafted decision that kept the listeners engaged and fully present. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched her hands with fascination, marveling at the skill and precision behind every movement. A few audience members found themselves unexpectedly moved. An elderly man dabbed at his eyes, touched by the beauty and emotion in the music. A young woman leaned forward, her face softened with wonder and appreciation. Even the children, who often struggled to remain attentive, were completely absorbed, their expressions reflecting fascination and quiet excitement. The young woman had created an environment where everyone could feel something personal and profound. Regardless of age or background, the piece began to evolve further. With her hands moving faster across the keys, weaving intricate patterns and harmonies that were both complex and enchanting, the music seemed to flow naturally from her, as if she and the piano were extensions of the same being. The audience could sense the connection she had with her instrument. The way her fingers communicated with the keys to create something alive and full of emotion. Each note resonated with clarity and intention, drawing listeners deeper into the unfolding story. The young woman's confidence was now unmistakable. Where there had once been hesitation, there was now control and mastery. She was fully engaged, yet the performance never felt forced or mechanical. It was fluid, organic, and heartfelt, a balance between technical skill and emotional expression. The audience responded in kind, their attention unwavering, their admiration growing with each passing moment. The room was filled with a shared sense of wonder, a collective recognition of the extraordinary talent before them. She allowed the music to breathe, inserting moments of silence and gentle pauses that amplified the impact of the notes that followed. The audience felt the power of these quiet moments, understanding that they were as important as the sounds themselves. The young woman had mastered the art of pacing and expression, using every element of the performance to convey meaning and evoke emotion. The experience was immersive, and the listeners were fully captivated. Unable to think of anything else outside the music, the piece gradually became more intense, with dramatic chords and faster passages that showcased both her technical ability and her emotional depth. The audience was spellbound, some leaning forward in their seats, others closing their eyes to absorb the full impact. Every note carried intention and meaning, every movement of her fingers a part of the unfolding story. The young woman had transformed the piano into a vessel for expression, a bridge connecting her innermost feelings to the hearts of those listening. The melody continued to evolve, introducing unexpected shifts and harmonies that kept the audience engaged and intrigued. There was a sense of anticipation and discovery in every measure, a feeling that something remarkable was always just around the corner. The young woman's skill and emotional intelligence were evident in the way she navigated the piece, balancing complexity with clarity, passion with subtlety. The audience could sense the care and thought behind every decision, deepening their appreciation for both the music and the performer at certain moments. She emphasized a single note or chord, allowing it to linger and resonate in the hall. The audience held their breath, captivated by the intensity and beauty of the sound. It was in these moments that the power of her performance became most evident. The ability to move people, not just through rapid passages or technical skill, but through the emotional weight carried in a single, carefully chosen sound. The young woman was teaching the audience to listen differently, to experience music not just as entertainment, but as a living, breathing form of expression as the piece neared its conclusion. The intensity gradually softened, returning to a calm and reflective mood. Her hands moved with deliberate grace, each note carefully considered and placed. The audience felt the journey come full circle, emotional arc of the performance reaching a satisfying and poignant resolution. The young woman's mastery of both technique and emotion had created a profound experience, leaving everyone present deeply moved. When the final note faded, there was a brief moment of silence, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The audience remained still, absorbing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The young woman rested her hands gently on the keys, her expression calm and serene. The room had transformed completely from the skeptical, whisper-filled space of her entrance into a place of shared admiration and respect. She had captivated the audience, challenged their assumptions, and conveyed something deeply human through her music. Slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then growing into a powerful, heartfelt wave. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling broadly, all expressing genuine appreciation for the performance. The young woman acknowledged the applause with a quiet nod, a humble but confident gesture. She had achieved something remarkable. She had transformed the audience's perception and created a shared, emotional experience that would linger long after the performance ended. The energy in the room had shifted permanently. The skepticism and expectation of failure that had greeted her arrival were now replaced with admiration and respect. The young woman had not only performed with technical excellence, but had also shared a piece of her soul, communicating through music in a way that transcended words. The audience had witnessed something rare, a moment of true artistry that left a lasting impression on everyone present. As she prepared for the final piece, the audience's anticipation was palpable. They had been taken on a journey through skill, emotion, and storytelling, and they were eager to see the culmination of her performance. The young woman, fully immersed in her music and aware of the connection she had established, drew a deep breath and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The stage was set for the final act, a moment that promised to solidify the extraordinary experience she had already created. Part 4 of her performance had not only demonstrated her growth and mastery, but it also set the stage for an unforgettable conclusion. The young woman adjusted her posture, taking a moment to let her hands rest on the keys before beginning the final piece. The audience's anticipation was palpable, a quiet energy that filled the room and made every heartbeat seem louder. They had already witnessed her skill, her emotion, and her ability to transform doubt into admiration. Now, everyone waited, holding their breath, to see how she would conclude this extraordinary performance. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, yet they carried a weight that immediately drew the listeners in. Her hands moved with grace and precision, striking chords that resonated deeply within the hall. The audience was silent, fully absorbed in the unfolding music. Each note seemed to speak directly to them, conveying emotion and intent without words. It was as if the young woman was opening a window into her soul, and the audience was privileged to see the view inside. She allowed the melody to build gradually, layering delicate harmonies and intricate rhythms that captured the attention and hearts of the listeners. The complexity of the music grew, but it never felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt natural, flowing effortlessly from her fingers as she guided the audience through an emotional journey. People leaned forward, eyes wide, captivated by the skill and expression that radiated from every movement and sound. The young woman's expression remained calm and focused, yet her eyes hinted at the depth of feeling driving each note. She was fully present, completely connected to the piano and the audience simultaneously. It was this presence that made the performance so compelling. The music was no longer just sound. It was a conversation, an intimate dialogue that transcended words. The audience responded, feeling the weight of each pause, the significance of every chord, and the subtlety of each shift in tempo. The piece began to swell, the notes growing louder and more dynamic, building a crescendo that demanded attention. Her fingers moved rapidly across the keys, yet each sound was deliberate and clear. The audience was captivated, some closing their eyes to fully immerse themselves, while others watched in awe, fascinated by the skill and emotion conveyed. The young woman's performance had reached a level where technical mastery and heartfelt expression were inseparable, creating a musical experience that was both moving and unforgettable. At certain moments, she allowed single notes to linger, letting their resonance fill the hall and create a profound sense of space. The audience sensed the power in these pauses, the quiet beauty that contrasted with the more intense passages. Her ability to balance strength and subtlety, to control the music with such precision while still expressing deep emotion, made every moment feel intentional and alive. People began to realize that what they had expected as a simple or amusing performance had evolved into a masterclass of artistry and human expression. The young woman continued to weave together melodies from earlier pieces, creating a rich and layered composition that tied the entire performance together. Each movement of her hands seemed effortless, yet it carried immense skill and intent. The audience could feel the story unfolding, each note building upon the last, leading them toward a climax that was both anticipated and surprising. The room was filled with a quiet intensity, everyone caught in the delicate balance between expectation and revelation. Her music began to rise to a climax, the tempo quickening, the chords becoming bolder, yet each note was still played with clarity and purpose. The audience was spellbound, completely absorbed in the unfolding journey. Some were visibly moved, their eyes glistening with emotion, while others leaned forward, captivated by the seamless combination of technical skill and heartfelt expression. The young woman's ability to command attention without dominating the space was remarkable. She allowed the music to speak for her, and it spoke volumes. As the climax reached its peak, she introduced a series of rapid arpeggios and intricate runs that displayed both her skill and her emotional engagement. The audience held their breath, following every twist and turn of the melody. Each note felt like a part of a larger story, a narrative that was unfolding in real time through the piano. The young woman's control over dynamics and pacing allowed her to guide the listeners through an experience that was both thrilling and emotionally resonant. The audience was not merely observing a performance. They were participating in it, feeling every nuance and every subtle change. Gradually, the intensity began to soften, the notes slowing, the chords becoming more gentle and reflective. The young woman allowed the music to breathe, inserting pauses that let the audience absorb the emotional journey they had just been part of. There was a sense of resolution, a feeling that the story had reached its natural conclusion. The audience could sense the careful crafting of the performance, the thought and care that went into every decision she had made. It was a masterful balance of complexity, emotion, and technical skill. Leaving everyone in the hall fully engaged and profoundly moved, the final passages were delicate and thoughtful, each note placed with precision and feeling. The young woman's hands moved gracefully, bringing the performance to a gentle, resonant close. The audience remained silent for a brief moment, caught in the aftermath of the musical journey they had experienced. There was a sense of awe and reverence in the room, collective understanding that they had witnessed something rare and beautiful. The young woman had transformed the space through her music, creating an unforgettable experience that touched each person in a personal way. When the last note faded, the silence was profound. The audience took a collective breath, still absorbing the emotional impact of the performance. Then, applause erupted, growing from soft claps to a thunderous standing ovation. People cheered and clapped, some with tears in their eyes, expressing genuine admiration and appreciation for the young woman's talent and artistry. She acknowledged the applause with a humble nod, a quiet smile crossing her face. She did not need to speak. Her music had already communicated everything she intended. The room was filled with a sense of shared experience and connection. The young woman had taken a space once filled with doubt and transformed it into one of admiration, respect, and emotional resonance. She had challenged assumptions, demonstrated extraordinary skill, and conveyed deep emotion through her music. The audience had been captivated not only by her technical ability, but by the sincerity and presence she brought to every note. It was a performance that would be remembered, a moment of pure artistry and human connection. As the applause continued, the young woman rose from the piano with grace and composure. Her eyes met those of several audience members, who nodded or smiled in acknowledgement of the remarkable journey they had just shared. She had delivered a performance that exceeded every expectation, a piano masterpiece that had transformed initial laughter and doubt into admiration and awe. The young woman's quiet confidence, dedication, and emotional expression had created a powerful and unforgettable experience, leaving the audience profoundly moved and deeply grateful for having witnessed her extraordinary talent.